Have you ever wondered why some people work hard for years and still stay trapped in financial stress? Why they wake up early, sacrifice their energy, push through exhaustion, and yet somehow never experience real peace when it comes to money? Meanwhile, others seem to build stability, confidence, opportunity, and long-term wealth almost naturally. It's easy to think the difference is luck. Some people blame the economy. Others blame their background, their parents, or the opportunities they never had. But what if the biggest difference is not income, not talent, not connections, but habits? More specifically, one habit. One simple principle that Jesus taught over and over again without using flashy language or promising instant riches. A habit so powerful that it can completely transform the direction of a person's financial life if practiced consistently. Because Jesus never taught people to chase money. He taught them how to manage responsibility. And most people completely miss this. They pray for abundance while neglecting what is already in their hands. They ask for breakthrough while wasting opportunities they already possess. They dream about wealth while practicing habits that quietly destroy it every single day. The truth is, wealth is rarely built in dramatic moments. It is built in quiet decisions nobody notices. The decision to save instead of waste. The decision to stay disciplined instead of chasing appearances. The decision to think long-term while everyone else lives for temporary pleasure. And that is exactly why so many people remain stuck, because they want the reward without becoming the person capable of sustaining it. But Jesus taught a different way, a deeper way, a way built on stewardship, discipline, patience, faithfulness, and multiplication. He taught that if a person cannot manage small things wisely, bigger things will eventually slip through their hands too. That principle does not only apply spiritually, it applies financially, emotionally, mentally, in every area of life. Think about it. How many people receive more money only to end up in the exact same situation a few months later? How many people finally get the opportunity they prayed for, only to lose it because they lacked discipline? More money does not automatically create wealth. Better habits do. That's the part nobody wants to hear because habits are not exciting. Discipline is not glamorous. Consistency does not go viral. But those are the very things that quietly separate people who build lasting wealth from people who stay trapped in cycles of stress for decades. And maybe today, that cycle ends for you. Maybe today is the day you stop seeing money as something that controls your life and start understanding the deeper principle Jesus was trying to teach. Because the habit we are about to talk about is not just about dollars in a bank account. It is about becoming wiser, stronger, more disciplined, more intentional, more trustworthy with what you already have. And once that transformation begins internally, everything around you starts to change. Opportunities look different. Spending changes. Decisions change. Your future changes. Suddenly, you stop living emotionally and start living intentionally. You stop trying to impress people and start trying to build something meaningful. You stop chasing quick rewards and start creating lasting freedom. That is the power of this habit. It changes the way you think. And when your thinking changes, your financial life begins to follow. So if you've been feeling stuck, overwhelmed, frustrated, or tired of watching money come and go without lasting progress, stay with me until the end of this video. Because the lesson Jesus taught thousands of years ago still has the power to completely transform a person's financial future today. And once you truly understand this one habit, you may never look at money the same way again. Before we go deeper, take a moment and really think about this question. What is the one financial habit that keeps holding you back? Is it overspending, procrastination, lack of discipline, fear of starting, or maybe constantly chasing short-term comfort instead of long-term freedom? Be honest with yourself, because awareness is the first step toward transformation. Nobody changes their financial future by pretending there isn't a problem. Change begins the moment you decide to confront the habits that have been silently controlling your life for years. And I want you to understand something powerful right now. Your future is not determined only by how much money you make. It is determined by the daily decisions you repeat over and over again when nobody is watching. That is why small habits matter so much. Tiny choices become lifestyles. Lifestyles become outcomes. And outcomes eventually become your reality. So if you're serious about building a better future, type the word discipline in the comments right now. Not for me, for yourself. Let it be a declaration that you are ready to think differently, act differently, and build differently from this day forward. Because discipline is what separates temporary excitement from lasting transformation. Anybody can feel motivated for one day. Anybody can get excited after watching a video, but real change happens when discipline continues after the emotion fades. And if you believe faith, wisdom, and strong habits can completely transform a person's life, make sure you subscribe and become part of this community. This channel is for people who want more than quick motivation. It's for people who want growth, purpose, financial wisdom, mental strength, spiritual discipline. And the truth is, in a world constantly teaching people to consume more, flex more, and live for appearances, very few people are learning how to actually build lasting wealth and peace. That's why these conversations matter. Because somebody out there is drowning in financial stress, not because they are lazy or incapable, but because nobody ever taught them the principles that create stability. Nobody taught them patience. Nobody taught them stewardship. Nobody taught them how powerful consistency can become over time. But today, that changes. Today, we're going to uncover the one money habit Jesus taught that has the power to completely reshape the way you think about wealth, opportunity, and success. And once you understand it, you'll begin to see why some people stay trapped financially for decades, while others slowly build a life of freedom, peace, and abundance from the inside out. So stay with me, because the next lesson might completely change the direction of your financial future. Now let's talk about the habit itself. The one principle Jesus taught repeatedly through his words, his parables, and the way he viewed responsibility. A principle so simple that many people overlook it, yet so powerful that it can completely change the direction of a person's financial life. That habit is faithful stewardship. And if you truly understand this idea, it will transform the way you see money forever. Because stewardship is bigger than budgeting, bigger than saving, bigger than investing. Stewardship is a mindset. It is the understanding that everything you have, your money, your time, your opportunities, your talents, your skills, your energy, must be managed wisely instead of carelessly consumed. This is where most people fail financially. They spend years asking for more while disrespecting what they already have. They pray for bigger opportunities while ignoring the small responsibilities sitting directly in front of them. They dream about financial freedom while practicing habits that create financial chaos every single day. And Jesus constantly warned people about this mindset. He taught that faithfulness in small things leads to greater things. That principle appears over and over again throughout his teachings, because he understood something human nature struggles to accept. If a person lacks discipline with little, more abundance usually amplifies the problem instead of solving it. Think about how many people believe their entire life would change if they suddenly made more money. They imagine a bigger paycheck automatically creating peace, stability, and happiness. But reality tells a different story. There are people making very little who still manage wisely, build slowly, stay disciplined, and eventually create stability. And there are people earning massive incomes who remain trapped in debt, stress, impulsive spending, and endless financial pressure. Why? Because income alone does not create wealth. Stewardship does. A person who cannot control small financial habits will struggle even when larger opportunities arrive. That is why Jesus focused so heavily on character, discipline, and responsibility. He understood that lasting success is built internally before it ever appears externally. And this is difficult for modern culture to hear because today's world glorifies fast success. People want overnight results. They want instant wealth. They want luxury without sacrifice. Social media constantly pushes the illusion that success is supposed to happen quickly and effortlessly. But real wealth rarely works that way. Real wealth is usually quiet, slow, intentional, built through consistent discipline repeated over many years. It grows in private before it becomes visible publicly. And faithful stewardship is the foundation of that entire process. Stewardship means learning how to handle what you already have with wisdom and purpose. It means stopping the cycle of emotional spending every time stress appears. It means understanding that every dollar has direction, every habit has consequences, every small decision compounds over time. Most people underestimate the power of repeated behavior. They think small daily choices do not matter because the effects are not immediate. But life is built through accumulation. A single unhealthy financial choice may seem harmless today. One impulsive purchase, one unnecessary expense, one careless decision. But repeated over months and years, those habits silently shape an entire future. The same is true in the opposite direction. Small acts of discipline may feel insignificant at first. Saving a little money, learning a new skill, avoiding unnecessary spending, creating a budget, staying patient. These actions may not look impressive today, but repeated consistently, They slowly create momentum that changes everything. That is the hidden power of stewardship. It turns ordinary discipline into extraordinary results over time. And Jesus taught this principle constantly because he wanted people to understand that growth begins with responsibility. Before multiplication comes management. Before increase comes faithfulness. Before abundance comes discipline. That is why many people stay stuck financially for years. Not because they are incapable of success, but because they never develop the habits required to sustain it. They constantly leak what they receive. Money comes in and immediately disappears. Opportunities appear and are wasted. Goals are set and abandoned. Emotional decisions replace intentional decisions. And eventually, they begin believing life is unfair while ignoring the habits silently sabotaging their future. But stewardship forces you to confront reality honestly. It forces you to stop blaming everything outside yourself and start asking difficult questions. Am I managing wisely? Am I wasting opportunities? Am I living for temporary pleasure instead of long-term peace? Am I building my future intentionally or simply reacting emotionally every day? Those questions matter because financial transformation begins with awareness. And one of the biggest lies people believe is that wealth starts in the bank account. It doesn't. Wealth starts in the mind. Long before someone becomes financially successful, they usually become mentally disciplined. They learn patience. They learn consistency. They learn delayed gratification. They learn how to say no to short-term impulses so they can create long-term freedom. That is stewardship. And Jesus understood how deeply connected money is to human behavior. Money reveals priorities. It exposes discipline. It magnifies character. That is why financial habits are never just financial. They are emotional and spiritual too. Some people spend emotionally because they are trying to escape stress. Some chase status because they want validation from others. Some constantly buy things they cannot afford because they are trying to fill internal emptiness with external possessions. But stewardship teaches something different. It teaches contentment, intentionality, and self-control. It teaches you to stop living for appearances and start living for purpose. Because true wealth is not about looking rich. It is about building stability, peace, freedom, and options for the future. Many people look wealthy while privately drowning in anxiety and debt. Meanwhile, disciplined people quietly build real security over time without needing constant attention or validation. And one of the most powerful parts of faithful stewardship is understanding that small beginnings are not something to be ashamed of. In fact, almost every strong financial future begins small. Small savings, small improvements, small opportunities, small disciplined choices repeated consistently. But pride often prevents people from starting small because they compare themselves to others. They want immediate results, immediate recognition, immediate success. Yet Jesus constantly emphasized humility, patience, and gradual growth because he understood that strong foundations matter more than fast appearances. A building constructed too quickly without structure eventually collapses under pressure. The same is true financially. Many people want rapid success without developing the internal discipline needed to sustain it, and when pressure comes, everything falls apart. Stewardship protects you from that. It builds stability from the inside out. It teaches you to think long-term instead of emotionally, to prepare instead of react, to build instead of merely consume. And maybe this is the lesson someone watching this video desperately needed to hear today. Maybe you've been frustrated because progress feels slow. Maybe you've been comparing yourself to people online who seem ahead of you financially. Maybe you've been discouraged because your current situation feels small. But never underestimate what faithful discipline can produce over time. Never underestimate the power of wise habits repeated daily for years. A single seed looks insignificant in the beginning, but properly protected, nourished, and cultivated, it eventually becomes something far greater than anyone imagined at the start. Your habits work the same way. Every disciplined decision plants a seed for your future. Every wise choice strengthens your foundation. Every act of stewardship moves you closer to freedom. And this is the beautiful part most people miss. Stewardship does not only change your finances, it changes you. It develops patience in impatient people, discipline in distracted people, wisdom in impulsive people, responsibility in careless people. Over time, you become stronger mentally and emotionally because you stop living as a victim of circumstance and start living intentionally. That shift changes everything. Suddenly, money stops controlling your emotions, fear stops controlling your decisions, comparison stops controlling your identity. You become focused, grounded, purpose-driven. And slowly the results begin to follow, because faithful stewardship always produces growth eventually. Maybe not overnight, maybe not instantly, but consistently, quietly, powerfully. That is the habit Jesus taught. Not obsession with wealth, not greed, not selfish ambition, but faithful management of what has already been placed in your hands. And the moment you begin practicing that principle consistently, your entire financial future can begin to change from the inside out. One of the most powerful lessons Jesus ever taught about money, growth, responsibility, and success came through a story that many people have heard, but very few truly understand. It is called the parable of the talents. And hidden inside this story is a life-changing principle that explains why some people multiply opportunities while others lose them completely. Because this parable was never just about money, it was about mindset, discipline, courage, responsibility, action, and the dangerous cost of wasting potential. Jesus told the story of a master preparing to leave on a journey. Before leaving, he called his servants and entrusted each of them with resources. To one servant, he gave 5 talents. To another, 2 talents, and to another, 1 talent. Each person received something valuable according to their ability. And right there is the first powerful lesson many people overlook. Not everyone starts with the same amount. Some people begin life with more opportunities, more connections, more support, or more resources than others. That is simply reality. But the story was never about comparing who received more. It was about what each person chose to do with what they already had. And that is where most people lose focus today. They spend so much time comparing their beginning to someone else's that they never maximize their own potential. They stare at other people's success while neglecting the opportunities sitting directly in front of them. They become bitter over what they lack instead of becoming faithful with what they possess. But Jesus shifts the focus completely. He teaches that growth begins the moment you stop obsessing over what somebody else received and start multiplying what has been placed in your own hands. Now notice what happens next in the parable. The servant with 5 talents immediately went to work. He used what he had. He took action. He multiplied it and gained 5 more. The servant with 2 talents did the same and doubled what he was given. But the third servant did something completely different. Instead of building, multiplying, or growing, he buried his talent in the ground. He hid it, protected it, avoided risk, avoided responsibility, avoided action. And when the master returned, the difference between these servants became painfully clear. The first 2 servants were rewarded, not because they started with the most, but because they were faithful and productive with what they had been given. The third servant, however, lost even the little he had because he allowed fear to paralyze him into inaction. And this is where the story comes deeply connected to modern life. Because there are millions of people today burying their talents emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and financially every single day. Some bury their abilities under fear. Some bury their dreams under procrastination. Some bury opportunities because they are terrified of failure, rejection, criticism, or discomfort. Others waste years waiting for the perfect moment that never comes. They keep telling themselves they will start later. Later they'll save money. Later they'll invest in themselves. Later they'll build discipline. Later they'll pursue the business idea. Later they'll learn the skill. Later they'll take responsibility. But later slowly becomes never. And while they wait, life keeps moving. Opportunities keep passing. Time keeps disappearing. Potential remains buried underground. That is the tragedy Jesus was exposing in this story. The greatest danger is not starting small. The greatest danger is refusing to use what you already have. Because many people believe wealth begins when you suddenly receive something massive. But most lasting success actually begins with multiplication of something small. A small opportunity becomes a business. A small habit becomes discipline. A small investment becomes stability. A small skill becomes income. A small daily decision becomes an entirely different future over time. But none of that happens if the seed remains buried. And that is exactly what fear does. Fear convinces people to hide instead of build. It whispers things like, "You're not ready, you don't have enough. What if you fail? What if people judge you? What if it doesn't work?" So instead of acting, they freeze, they delay, they hesitate, and eventually they become trapped in a cycle of excuses while watching other people grow. But the first 2 servants in the parable understood something powerful. Growth requires movement. Multiplication requires action. Nothing increases when it is constantly hidden, protected, and avoided. Think about how this applies financially today. Some people never start saving because they believe the amount is too small to matter. Some never invest in learning because they think success belongs only to naturally talented people. Some refuse to pursue opportunities because they fear looking foolish if they fail. And yet the people who eventually build stability are often not the most gifted. They are simply the ones willing to consistently use what they already have. That is what separates builders from dreamers. Builders act. Dreamers only imagine. Builders plant seeds. Dreamers keep waiting for perfect conditions. Builders understand that progress begins imperfectly. Nobody starts as an expert. Nobody begins fully confident. Nobody has everything figured out in the beginning. But action creates growth. Responsibility creates momentum. Discipline creates results. And Jesus was teaching this long before modern success culture ever existed. Another powerful truth hidden in this parable is that the master expected increase. That matters deeply, because it reveals that potential is meant to be developed, not wasted. Your gifts are not accidents. Your opportunities are not random. Your abilities were meant to grow through use. Yet so many people live beneath their potential because they underestimate what consistent effort can accomplish over time. They look at successful people and assume those individuals were simply lucky, but most success is not luck. It is multiplication. Small disciplined actions repeated consistently until the results become impossible to ignore. That is why stewardship matters so much, because whatever you manage wisely tends to grow. Skills grow when practiced. Money grows when managed carefully. Confidence grows through action. Opportunities grow when responsibility is demonstrated. But neglected things usually shrink. Wasted opportunities disappear. Poor habits multiply problems. Carelessness destroys momentum. The third servant failed because he thought preservation was enough. He thought simply holding on to what he had without growth or effort would protect him. But life does not reward stagnation. Growth requires movement. And maybe this is the exact lesson someone listening today needs to hear. Maybe you've been burying your own talent without realizing it. Maybe fear has kept you from starting. Maybe disappointment from past failures convinced you to stop trying. Maybe comparison has made you feel too small to begin. Maybe you've spent years waiting for confidence before taking action. But confidence rarely comes first. Action creates confidence. Discipline creates momentum. Responsibility creates growth. You do not need to start with enormous resources to begin changing your future. You simply need to stop burying what you already possess. Stop underestimating small beginnings. Stop waiting for perfect conditions. Stop believing that your current limitations determine your final destination. The servants who multiplied their talents were not rewarded because everything was easy for them. They were rewarded because they were willing to act faithfully with what they had. And that principle still changes lives today. A person who faithfully manages small income can eventually build wealth. A person who consistently develops skills can eventually create opportunities. A person who stays disciplined during difficult seasons can eventually build freedom others only dream about. But none of it happens accidentally. Growth is intentional. Multiplication is intentional. Stewardship is intentional. And perhaps the deepest lesson inside this parable is this: God is not asking you to compare yourself with somebody else's journey. He is asking what you are doing with your own potential. What are you building with your time? What are you doing with your opportunities? What habits are shaping your future every single day? Are you multiplying your gifts or burying them beneath fear, distraction, excuses, and procrastination? Because one day, everyone faces the results of their habits. The future you experience tomorrow is being quietly created by the decisions you repeat today. Every disciplined action plants a seed. Every wise decision builds momentum. Every act of responsibility strengthens your foundation. And over time, those invisible habits become visible results. That is the secret hidden inside the parable of the talents. Wealth is not merely about receiving more. It is about multiplying what you already have. And the people who eventually build extraordinary lives are usually the ones who stop making excuses, stop hiding their potential, and start faithfully using the small opportunities already sitting in front of them. Now let's bring this lesson into the modern world, because the financial traps people face today are more dangerous than ever before. And the reason they are so dangerous is because most of them do not look harmful in the beginning. In fact, many of these habits are celebrated by society. People are encouraged to spend emotionally, live impulsively, chase appearances, and measure success by how impressive their lifestyle looks to strangers online. Everywhere you turn, there is pressure to consume more, show more, flex more, and prove your worth through material things. Social media constantly pushes the idea that success must look luxurious, immediate, and effortless. Expensive cars, designer clothes, fancy vacations, constant upgrades, instant gratification. People are surrounded every day by images designed to make them feel behind, inadequate, or unsuccessful, unless they are constantly buying something new. And slowly, without realizing it, millions of people fall into the same trap. They begin spending money emotionally instead of intentionally. They stop building and start performing. They stop thinking long-term and start living moment to moment. And this is exactly the opposite of the principles Jesus taught. Because Jesus constantly emphasized discipline, humility, patience, wisdom, and stewardship. But modern culture teaches consumption without self-control. It teaches people to satisfy every impulse immediately. Feel stressed? Buy something. Feel insecure? Show off something expensive. Feel unhappy? Escape into temporary pleasure. And this creates a cycle that quietly destroys financial stability from the inside out. The dangerous part is that emotional spending often feels good in the moment. That new purchase creates excitement. That temporary reward creates distraction. That impulse creates a short emotional high. But eventually reality returns. Bills remain. Debt grows. Anxiety increases. And many people find themselves trapped in financial pressure they created through repeated, undisciplined habits. What makes this even more painful is that many individuals are not broke because they lack potential. They are broke because nobody taught them self-control. Nobody taught them delayed gratification. Nobody taught them how destructive emotional decision-making becomes over time. Think about how many people spend years trying to look successful instead of becoming successful. They finance lifestyles they cannot truly afford just to maintain appearances. They buy things to impress people who are not paying their bills. They chase validation through possessions while their future quietly suffers underneath the surface. And the truth is, appearances can be dangerously deceptive. Some people look wealthy while privately drowning in debt, stress, fear, and insecurity. Meanwhile, truly disciplined people often live below their means while quietly building freedom over time. This is one of the biggest mindset shifts people must understand. Real wealth is not about looking rich. Real wealth is about having peace, options, stability, and freedom. A person with flashy possessions but no financial control is not truly free. If every paycheck disappears immediately, if every emergency creates panic, if every decision is driven by impulse, then the lifestyle is only an illusion of success. And Jesus understood this deeply. That is why he constantly warned people about becoming controlled by materialism, greed, and outward appearances. Because once possessions become tied to identity, people lose the ability to think clearly. They begin making financial decisions emotionally instead of wisely. They buy things to feel important. They spend money to escape insecurity. They chase status to cover inner emptiness. But external possessions can never permanently solve internal problems. That is why some people continuously consume more while feeling no real peace inside. The deeper issue was never lack of stuff. It was lack of discipline, purpose, and contentment. Another modern financial trap is impatience. Society trains people to expect instant results in everything. Instant entertainment, instant delivery, instant success, instant rewards. Nobody wants to wait anymore. But wealth building rarely happens instantly. Stability is usually built slowly, quietly, and consistently over time. Yet many people sabotage their future because they become discouraged when progress feels slow. They save money for a few weeks and quit because results are not dramatic enough. They attempt discipline temporarily but return to old habits once excitement fades. They compare their chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20 and begin feeling like failures before their own journey even has time to grow. But the people who eventually build strong financial futures understand something most people never learn. Consistency matters more than intensity. Small wise decisions repeated over many years create extraordinary outcomes. A person saving modest amounts consistently may eventually outperform someone who earns far more but lacks discipline entirely. This is the power of compounding habits. Tiny actions may seem insignificant today, but repeated daily, monthly, and yearly, they shape entire destinies. Unfortunately, modern culture rarely celebrates consistency because consistency looks boring in the beginning. There is nothing flashy about budgeting, nothing glamorous about patience, nothing exciting about saying no to unnecessary spending. Yet those quiet decisions are often the exact reason some people eventually escape financial stress while others remain trapped for decades. And perhaps one of the biggest traps of all is living without direction. Many people never stop to ask themselves what they actually want their financial future to look like. They simply react emotionally day after day. Money comes in, money goes out, and years disappear without intentional planning. Without vision, spending becomes random. Goals become unclear. Discipline weakens, and life slowly drifts instead of progressing. Jesus taught people to live purposefully, not carelessly. Purpose creates focus. Focus creates discipline. Discipline creates progress. But without direction, people become vulnerable to every distraction around them. Every trend influences them. Every advertisement manipulates them. Every emotional craving controls them. And this is exactly how financial instability quietly grows. Not always through one catastrophic mistake, but through thousands of small, careless decisions repeated over time. One impulse purchase here, one unnecessary debt there, one ignored responsibility after another. Eventually, those habits compound into stress, pressure, and regret. But here is the encouraging truth. The same principle works in reverse. Just as careless habits compound negatively, disciplined habits compound positively. Small wise decisions create momentum. Small acts of self-control build strength. Small financial improvements create confidence. Over time, intentional living begins replacing emotional living, and this is where transformation starts happening. The moment a person stops asking, "What do I feel like doing right now?" and starts asking, "What kind of future am I building?" everything changes. Spending changes. Priorities change. Habits change. Perspective changes. Suddenly, money becomes a tool instead of a source of emotional chaos. That shift is powerful because it moves a person from survival thinking into builder thinking. Builders think long-term. Builders plant seeds. Builders sacrifice temporary comfort for future freedom. Builders understand that discipline today creates peace tomorrow. And this is the mindset Jesus constantly encouraged through his teachings. He never glorified reckless consumption. He glorified wisdom, responsibility, patience, and stewardship, because he understood that a person without self-control can never fully experience lasting freedom. And maybe this message is uncomfortable for some people, because it forces honesty. It forces us to examine habits we often justify emotionally. It forces us to confront the ways we sabotage ourselves through impulsiveness, comparison, and lack of discipline. But honesty is where transformation begins. Nothing changes until truth is faced directly. So ask yourself honestly, are your habits building your future or quietly destroying it? Are your financial decisions driven by wisdom or emotion? Are you planting seeds for long-term peace or chasing temporary comfort at the expense of your future? Because the reality is simple but powerful. Every dollar you spend is a reflection of priorities. Every habit is shaping the person you are becoming. Every repeated action is moving you closer to freedom or closer to frustration. And the good news is that no matter how trapped you may feel right now, habits can change. Discipline can be learned. Wisdom can grow. Financial patterns can be broken. Your current situation does not have to become your permanent future. But transformation begins when you stop following the culture of impulse and start embracing the principles of stewardship, patience, intentionality, and responsibility. That is the path that slowly builds real wealth. Not overnight success, not appearances, not emotional spending, but disciplined habits repeated faithfully over time. And while the world continues chasing quick pleasure, the people who master stewardship quietly build something far more valuable: stability, peace, freedom, and a future strong enough to withstand life's storms. Now that we've exposed the traps that keep so many people financially stuck, it's time to talk about the solution. Because understanding the problem is important, but transformation only begins when action replaces awareness. And this is where everything starts becoming practical. Because wealth is not built through motivation alone. Motivation may inspire you for a moment, but habits determine your future. Discipline determines your future. Repeated daily actions determine your future. And when Jesus taught stewardship, he was teaching people a system of living, a pattern of responsibility that produces growth over time. The beautiful thing about this principle is that it works slowly, consistently, and predictably when practiced faithfully. It does not depend on luck. It does not require you to become famous overnight. It does not require perfection. It simply requires intentional habits repeated consistently long enough to compound into something powerful. That is the formula most people overlook because they are searching for dramatic breakthroughs while ignoring daily discipline. But lasting wealth is usually built through small wise decisions repeated over years. And today we are going to break down the core habits that create that process. These habits may sound simple at first, but never underestimate simple principles consistently applied. Simple disciplines are often the exact reason ordinary people create extraordinary futures. The first habit is learning to save consistently. And this may sound basic, but saving is far deeper than just putting money aside. Saving is proof that you are learning self-control. It is proof that you are beginning to think beyond the present moment. Every time you save money instead of spending impulsively, you are training yourself to value the future more than temporary pleasure. That is powerful because most people are trapped financially, not because they never earn money, but because everything immediately disappears the moment it enters their hands. There is no margin, no preparation, no protection, and this creates constant instability. Every unexpected expense becomes a crisis. Every setback becomes emotional pressure. But disciplined saving changes something psychologically. It creates breathing room. It creates confidence. It creates peace. Even small savings matter because the habit itself is transforming your mindset. Many people refuse to start saving because they think the amount is too small. But the amount is not the most important thing in the beginning. The discipline is. A person who cannot save a little consistently will struggle to manage larger amounts later. Remember the principle Jesus taught. Faithfulness with small things comes before greater things. Small discipline prepares you for larger responsibility. And over time, those small savings begin to compound, slowly at first, quietly, almost invisibly, but eventually the results become undeniable. What once felt impossible starts becoming reality because consistent habits always produce outcomes eventually. The second habit is investing in yourself. This is one of the greatest wealth-building principles many people ignore. Your skills, knowledge, discipline, and mindset are assets. The more valuable you become, the more opportunities you attract. Yet many people spend years consuming entertainment while neglecting personal growth entirely. They invest heavily in distraction, but almost nothing in development. Meanwhile, disciplined individuals are quietly learning new skills, reading, improving communication, strengthening their mindset, studying opportunities, and preparing themselves for greater responsibility. And this matters because income often follows value. The more problems you can solve, the more valuable you become in the marketplace. Jesus constantly emphasized growth, wisdom, and multiplication. He taught people not to waste what they had been given, and your mind may be one of the greatest resources you possess. A new skill can completely change your financial future. A new level of discipline can open doors you never imagined. A stronger mindset can break limitations that kept you trapped for years. But growth requires intentional effort. Nobody accidentally becomes disciplined. Nobody accidentally becomes wise. Nobody accidentally builds stability. It happens through repeated investment into your own development. And perhaps one of the most important investments you can make is learning patience, because impatience destroys more financial futures than lack of opportunity ever will. Impatient people quit too quickly, spend too emotionally, chase shortcuts, fall for illusions. But patient people build steadily. They understand that slow growth is still growth. They trust the process even when results are not immediately visible. The third habit is avoiding waste. This is one of the most overlooked forms of stewardship. Waste silently destroys potential. And waste is not only about money. People waste time, energy, focus, opportunities, talents, attention. Years of their lives disappear through distraction and carelessness. Financially, waste often hides in small repeated habits people barely notice anymore. Constant impulse purchases, unnecessary subscriptions, emotional spending, lifestyle inflation, buying things to impress others. These behaviors may seem harmless individually, but compounded over time, they quietly drain resources that could have been building freedom instead. And Jesus understood the importance of stewardship deeply. Throughout his teachings, there was always an emphasis on valuing resources wisely instead of carelessly squandering them. Because whatever you waste consistently eventually weakens your future. Think about how many people work incredibly hard only to constantly sabotage themselves through lack of discipline afterward. They earn money through effort but lose progress through careless habits. That is exhausting. Stewardship breaks that cycle by teaching intentionality. Intentional people stop asking, "What do I feel like buying?" and start asking, "Does this align with the future I'm trying to build?" That single shift changes everything. Because once purpose enters your financial decisions, waste becomes easier to recognize. Suddenly, you stop seeing discipline as restriction and start seeing it as protection. Protection for your peace, protection for your future, protection for your freedom. The fourth habit, And perhaps the one modern culture understands the least is generosity. This may sound surprising in a conversation about wealth, but generosity is deeply connected to abundance thinking. Greedy people often live in constant fear: fear of losing, fear of lacking, fear of not having enough. Scarcity controls them emotionally. But generosity develops a completely different mindset. It teaches trust instead of panic, gratitude instead of desperation, perspective instead of obsession. Jesus constantly taught generosity because he understood that money should never become an idol controlling the human heart. The goal of wealth is not merely accumulation, it is impact, it is freedom. It is the ability to help, build, provide, and create stability not only for yourself but for others too. Generosity also keeps people grounded. It reminds them that wealth without character eventually becomes empty. Some people gain money yet lose peace, relationships, integrity, and purpose along the way. That is not true success. True wealth includes wisdom, peace, discipline, and the ability to live without constant fear. Generosity strengthens that mentality because it breaks the emotional grip materialism can have over people. It reminds you that money is a tool, not your identity. Now, when you combine these habits together, consistent saving, self-investment, avoiding waste, and practicing generosity, something incredible begins to happen. You slowly transform into a different kind of person. Your mindset changes, your confidence changes, your relationship with money changes. You stop reacting emotionally and start thinking strategically. You stop chasing appearances and start building foundations. You stop looking for shortcuts and start respecting the power of consistency. And perhaps most importantly, you stop viewing wealth as something magical or unattainable. You begin understanding that financial freedom is usually built one disciplined decision at a time, day by day, habit by habit, choice by choice. This is why Jesus focused so heavily on stewardship rather than obsession with riches, because stewardship creates sustainability. It develops the internal structure required to handle growth responsibly. Without that structure, more money often creates bigger problems instead of greater peace. But disciplined habits create stability from the inside out. They prepare you emotionally, mentally, and financially for greater opportunities when they arrive. And opportunities always flow toward responsibility. People trust disciplined individuals. Businesses reward disciplined individuals. Growth follows disciplined individuals. Why? Because discipline creates reliability, and reliability creates multiplication. One of the greatest lies people believe is that their small actions do not matter. But life is shaped through accumulation. Tiny repeated habits become powerful over time. $1 saved consistently matters. 1 hour invested into learning matters. One wise decision repeated daily matters. One disciplined choice today may look insignificant, but multiplied across years, it can completely transform your future. That is how real wealth is usually built: quietly, slowly, intentionally. While most people chase excitement, disciplined people chase consistency, and consistency eventually wins. So if you feel overwhelmed about your financial future right now, do not focus only on massive goals. Focus on faithful habits. Focus on becoming a better steward today than you were yesterday. Maybe you cannot change your entire life overnight, but you can make one wiser decision today. You can begin saving. You can stop one destructive habit. You can invest in learning. You can choose discipline over impulse, just once more today. And those small victories matter far more than you realize because they are planting seeds. Every disciplined action plants something into your future. Every wise habit strengthens your foundation. Every intentional choice moves you closer to freedom. And over time, those invisible daily disciplines become visible success. People may eventually look at your stability, your growth, your peace, and your progress, and think it happened suddenly. But you will know the truth. It was built through stewardship, through patience, through responsibility, through consistent habits repeated, long after motivation faded. That is the real wealth-building formula Jesus pointed people toward. Not greed, not shortcuts, not obsession with appearances, but faithful stewardship of what has already been placed into your hands. Now we arrive at the most important part of this entire message, because everything we've talked about so far means very little if your mind does not change. You can understand stewardship, you can recognize the traps, you can even know the right habits. But if your identity stays the same, your results will eventually stay the same too. Because real financial transformation does not begin in your wallet, it begins in your thinking. In the way you see yourself, in the way you interpret money, in the way you respond to pressure, opportunity, discipline, and time. And this is exactly where Jesus' teaching becomes deeper than just money management. because he was never only trying to change people's behavior. He was trying to change their nature, the way they think, the way they live, the way they perceive value and responsibility. The first mental shift is this: stop seeing yourself as someone who is trying to become wealthy and start seeing yourself as someone who is learning to be a faithful builder. That might sound simple, but it changes everything internally. Because when you see yourself as trying, you give yourself permission to be inconsistent. You tolerate excuses. You allow temporary discipline instead of permanent identity. But when you see yourself as a builder, everything becomes intentional. Builders do not randomly spend their resources without thinking. Builders do not ignore structure. Builders do not sabotage their own progress through careless habits. Builders think long-term, even when progress feels slow. And that is what stewardship actually creates: a builder mindset. A mindset where every decision matters, not because you are afraid, but because you are responsible. And responsibility changes behavior in a way motivation never can. The second shift is learning to detach your identity from your current financial condition. This is one of the most powerful internal changes a person can make, because many people unconsciously become what their situation tells them they are. If they are struggling financially, they start identifying as broke. If they are making mistakes, they start identifying as bad with money. If they are stuck, they start identifying as stuck people. And once identity is fixed in limitation, behavior follows that limitation. But Jesus constantly pointed people beyond their current condition. He did not define them by where they were. He called them into who they could become. And that principle still applies today. Your current situation is not your identity. It is your starting point. It is your training ground. It is your temporary position, not your permanent definition. The moment you separate identity from condition, you regain control. Because now you are no longer acting based on emotion or circumstance. You are acting based on purpose and direction. The third mental shift is delayed gratification, the ability to choose long-term reward over short-term comfort. This is where most people struggle the most because modern life is built to reward impatience. Everything is instant. Everything is fast. Everything is designed to give you pleasure immediately. But wealth does not respond to impatience. Wealth responds to consistency. It responds to restraint. It responds to the ability to say not now so that you can say yes to something far greater later. And this is exactly what Jesus was teaching through stewardship and discipline. Because every time you delay gratification, you are strengthening your future self. You are building a version of you that has more options, more stability, and more freedom. But every time you choose impulse over discipline, you are borrowing from your future to satisfy your present. And eventually, the future becomes empty. The fourth shift is understanding that money is not just something you earn. It is something that reflects your behavior. This is a difficult truth for many people because it removes the illusion that money is random or unfair. In reality, money tends to follow patterns of behavior. Discipline attracts stability. Waste attracts instability. Planning attracts growth. Carelessness attracts loss. Focus attracts opportunity. Distraction attracts confusion. And once you understand this, you stop seeing money as something that happens to you and start seeing it as something that responds to you. Your habits, your decisions, your discipline, your mindset, all of these are constantly shaping your financial direction. This is why two people can earn the same amount of money and end up in completely different financial situations. The difference is not always income, it is behavior. The fifth shift is moving from emotional decision-making to intentional living. Most financial struggle is not purely mathematical. It is emotional. People spend when they are stressed. They spend when they are happy. They spend when they are bored. They spend when they are trying to impress others. They spend when they feel insecure. In other words, money becomes a reaction to emotion instead of a tool guided by purpose. But stewardship changes that dynamic completely. It introduces pause, reflection, awareness. Instead of reacting, you begin responding. Instead of impulse, you begin intention. And this shift alone can transform a person's entire financial life because it breaks the cycle of unconscious spending. It gives you space to think, to evaluate, to choose. And in that space, wisdom begins to grow. The sixth shift is seeing discipline not as restriction, but as freedom in development. Many people associate discipline with limitation. They think discipline means I cannot enjoy life, or I have to suffer now to be happy later. But that is a misunderstanding. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is structure. It is protection. It is direction. Without discipline, freedom becomes chaos. But with discipline, freedom becomes stability. Because discipline ensures that your future is not destroyed by your present impulses. It ensures that your choices today are building something instead of breaking something. And over time, discipline stops feeling like restriction and starts feeling like control, the ability to shape your own future instead of being controlled by circumstances. And finally, the deepest mental shift of all is this: understanding that small decisions are not small at all. This is one of the greatest truths Jesus communicated through his teachings. He constantly emphasized faithfulness in small things because he understood that life is built through accumulation. Nobody wakes up one day suddenly financially stable. It is built through thousands of invisible decisions. What you spend, what you save, what you repeat, what you ignore, what you tolerate, what you practice daily. All of these small things are quietly constructing your future. And when you realize that, your respect for daily habits changes completely. You stop dismissing small actions as unimportant. You begin treating every decision as part of a larger story you are building. And when all of these mental shifts come together, something powerful happens. You stop living reactively and start living intentionally. You stop blaming your circumstances and start shaping them. You stop waiting for life to change and start changing how you respond to life. You begin to see money differently. You begin to see yourself differently. You begin to see time differently. And most importantly, you begin to see your future not as something uncertain, but as something you are actively building through discipline, faithfulness, and stewardship. That is the transformation Jesus was pointing toward. Not just better financial habits, but a renewed mind. Because once your thinking changes, everything else eventually follows. And now, as we bring everything together, here's the truth you need to hold on to more than anything else. Your financial situation is not your final story. It is simply a reflection of habits that can still be changed. It is a snapshot of where you are, not a definition of where you must stay. Because the same way small decisions created your current reality, small disciplined decisions can rebuild it. You don't need a perfect start. You don't need a massive breakthrough. You don't need everything figured out today. What you need is consistency. One better choice at a time. One moment of discipline at a time. One act of stewardship repeated long enough to create momentum. And even if progress feels slow, do not underestimate what is happening in the background. Every time you choose discipline over impulse, you are rewriting your future. Every time you choose patience over pressure, you are building strength. Every time you choose wisdom over emotion, you are quietly stepping closer to freedom. Because real change is not loud at the beginning. It is quiet, almost invisible. But over time, it becomes undeniable. So if you feel like you're starting late, you're not. If you feel like you've made mistakes, you're not finished. If you feel like change is too far away, it's not. You are one decision away from a different direction. And the moment you start practicing faithful stewardship consistently, even in the smallest ways, your life begins to shift in ways you may not see immediately, but will eventually feel in every area of your future. Keep going, stay disciplined, build quietly, and trust that the seeds you plant today are already shaping the life you will live tomorrow. And as we come to the end of this message, I want to leave you with something simple but deeply important. The one money habit Jesus consistently taught is faithful stewardship, the ability to wisely manage what is already in your hands, not chasing more for the sake of status, not wasting what you have through impulse, not comparing your journey to others, but learning to be disciplined, intentional, and responsible with every opportunity, every resource, and every decision. Because the truth is, wealth is not only built by what you earn, it is built by what you consistently do with what you earn. And Jesus made this clear through every principle of stewardship, responsibility, and multiplication. So the real question is not just how do I make more money? The deeper question is, am I faithful with what I already have? Because that answer will determine everything that comes next. Now I want to hear from you. What is the one financial habit you are going to change starting today? Write it in the comments. Not for anyone else, but as a personal commitment to yourself. And if this message helped you see money, discipline, and stewardship in a new way, make sure you like this video and subscribe. Because this is a space for growth, for mindset change, financial wisdom, and life transformation rooted in discipline and truth. Remember this: real wealth is not just about money in your hands, it is about wisdom in your decisions. And when your decisions change, your future will follow. Stay disciplined, stay faithful, and keep building the life you were meant to create.